When the bride had nowhere left to go, a quiet rancher gave her a home. A woman can lose a future in one breath, but Clara Whitcomb lost hers in front of an entire town. The church bell in Willow Creek had rung at noon, bright and proud above the little white chapel, and every bench inside was filled. Women leaned shoulder to shoulder with folded gloves in their laps. Men held their hats against their knees. Children were hushed with hard looks from their mothers. Outside, 2 horses stamped in the dust near the hitching rail, and the summer wind pushed little clouds of dry earth along the street. Clara stood at the altar in her aunt's old wedding dress, the lace yellowed with age and mended in places only a careful eye could see. She had spent 3 nights sewing tiny pearls back along the collar by lamplight, telling herself that a dress did not need to be new to carry hope. Her hands were folded over a small bouquet of white prairie roses. The stems had begun to bend from the heat of her palms. Her groom was not there. At first, folks pretended not to notice. Reverend Pike cleared his throat and smiled too often. Clara's friend Ruth, sitting in the second row, kept glancing toward the door as though she could summon a man by worry alone. Somewhere behind Clara, a woman whispered, then another answered under her breath. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. By the time 30 had gone by, even the organist stopped touching the keys. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the chapel doors. She would not look down. She would not turn around and watch the town watching her. Wayne Bell had promised he would come. He had stood outside the feed store 2 weeks before, taken both her hands, and told her a man would be a fool to leave a woman like her waiting. It turned out he was exactly that kind of fool. The doors opened at last, but it was not Wayne. A skinny stable boy named Tommy stepped inside, red-faced and trembling, holding a folded paper between 2 fingers like it might burn him. He looked too young to carry such a cruel thing. He took 3 careful steps down the aisle, then stopped as every eye in the church turned on him. "Miss Clara," he whispered. She knew before she touched it. Still, she took the note. Her fingers did not shake until the paper opened. There were only a few lines. Wayne had decided marriage was not wise. He had been offered work and a fine start with Mr. Harlan's niece over in Red Bluff. He wished Clara well. He hoped she would understand. That was all. No apology worth keeping. No courage. No face. Just ink on paper brought by a child after he had let her stand dressed as a bride in front of every person who would remember it. For a moment, the chapel was so quiet Clara could hear a fly tapping against a window pane. Then somebody sighed. That small sound nearly broke her. Clara folded the note once, then again, until it was a hard little square in her hand. She looked at Reverend Pike, whose mouth had gone pale beneath his gray mustache. Then she turned. The aisle seemed longer than any road she had ever walked. Faces blurred on both sides of her. Some pitied her. Some enjoyed the shame of it more than they would ever confess. Mrs. Calder pressed a handkerchief to her lips, but her eyes were sharp. Old Mr. Teague stared at the floor. Ruth was crying silently, but Clara could not bear comfort just then. Comfort would make her fall apart. So she lifted her chin and walked. Every step made the floorboards creak beneath the hem of that borrowed dress. The church doors stood open, and beyond them lay the town street, bright with sun and dust and ordinary life, as if Clara's whole world had not just split down the middle. She crossed the threshold without one tear. Outside, the heat struck her face. A wagon rattled past and slowed when the driver saw her. Clara kept walking, past the mercantile, past the blacksmith shop, past the boarding house where she had no money left for another week's rent, past the little lane that led toward the cabin where she had once lived with her mother before illness took her, and then with her father before debt took the rest. She had no home to return to. That was the truth Wayne had known when he promised to marry her. It was the truth that made his leaving so cruel. Clara's father had been a maker of fine saddles, a patient man with strong hands and a soft voice. Folks had come from 3 counties away for his leatherwork, but fever had left him weak, and bad seasons had left him owing money. When he died in February, the shop was sold. The tools were taken, and Clara was left with a small trunk, a few dresses, and the skill of stitching leather that most men in Willow Creek refused to pay a woman for. Wayne had seemed like rescue. By the time she reached the edge of town, the chapel bell was silent behind her. The road stretched west between dry grass and low mesquite. Her shoes pinched. Dust clung to the damp hem of her wedding dress. The roses in her hand had begun to shed petals. She walked until there were no buildings left beside her, only fence posts and wind. Then she sat on a flat stone near the road, because her legs would carry her no farther. For the first time that day, Clara looked at the note again. The words swam, not because she was crying, but because the sun was too bright and her heart was too tired to see straight. She pressed the paper into her lap and stared across the open land. There was nowhere to go. The thought came plain and cold. Not one door in Willow Creek would open without a question behind it. Not one woman would hire her without wanting the whole story told twice. Not one man would look at her without remembering how she had stood at the altar alone. In a town like that, shame did not stay with the guilty. It spread like smoke and settled on whoever had been hurt. Clara sat very still. A hawk circled high above the road. Far off, a horse nickered. The wind lifted the veil from her shoulder and dragged it across the dust like a white flag. She was reaching to pull it back when she heard slow hoofbeats. Not hurried, not curious, steady. A bay horse came into view, carrying a broad-shouldered man in a faded brown coat. Clara recognized him before he drew near. Samuel Reed owned the old three-lantern ranch north of town, a quiet spread with a failing cattle herd and a peach orchard people said had not given decent fruit in years. He was not a man who filled rooms with talk. He came to town for supplies, paid what he owed, and left before gossip could catch him. He had been in the church. She remembered seeing him in the back, hat in hand, face shadowed. Samuel slowed his horse a respectful distance away. He did not stare at her dress. He did not look at the note in her lap. He removed his hat, and the wind moved through his dark hair. "Miss Whitcomb," he said gently, "I won't trouble you if you ask me to ride on." Clara said nothing. He glanced toward the sinking sun, then back at her. "But evening is coming, and I could not find peace in leaving you beside this road in your wedding dress." The kindness in his voice was almost worse than pity, because it asked nothing from her. Clara's throat tightened. Samuel held his hat against his chest. "Do you have anywhere to go?" The question was simple. No judgment. No town gossip hiding inside it. Just a man looking at a woman on a roadside and seeing the truth everyone else had dressed up in whispers. Clara tried to answer with pride. She tried to say she had friends or plans or some place waiting. But pride had walked out of the church with her. It had made it as far as the edge of town. It had nothing left. "No," she said. The word fell small between them. Samuel's face changed, not with surprise, but with sorrow he kept carefully reined in. Clara looked down at the dead roses in her hand. "My father's gone. The shop is gone. Wayne knew that. Everyone knows it now. I have a trunk at the boarding house and not enough money to keep the room past Friday." She swallowed hard. "I have nowhere, Mr. Reed." The bay horse shifted, leather creaking softly. Samuel stood there a long moment. The sun caught the dust on his boots. When he spoke again, his voice was low and certain. "Then now you do." Clara looked up. He stepped closer, but not too close. "My ranch house has a back room with a proper lock. My cook left in spring, and my accounts are a mess, but that is not what I mean. Your father once repaired my saddle after a fall near Blackwater Creek. Wouldn't take full pay because he said a working man needed his horse sound more than he needed his pride stroked. I remember his hands. I remember yours too, Miss Whitcomb. You stitched the corner piece. He said you had the better eye." Clara gripped the note tighter. Samuel continued, plain and careful as if each word had to stand straight. "I have harness, saddles, and tack wearing down faster than I can haul them to Abilene. I have men who tear leather and curse when it fails. I have a small workroom sitting empty because I never learned the craft. This is not charity. I would not insult you with that. It is paid work if you'll take it. A room, wages, and a bench where your hands can do what they were taught to do." The world seemed to hold its breath. Clara stared at him, searching for the catch. A woman alone on a bachelor's ranch would give Willow Creek enough talk to last a year. Samuel knew it. She could see he knew it by the tightness around his mouth. So he added, "Mrs. Larkin lives at the ranch as housekeeper when her knees allow it. She is old enough to scold us both and mean it. You would be safe. You would be respected. And if after one night you wish to leave, I will drive you wherever you choose." Clara looked back toward town. The chapel roof showed above the buildings, white and sharp in the evening light. Somewhere inside, people would already be telling the story. Some would say poor Clara. Some would say she must have done something to make Wayne run. By tomorrow, the truth would have new clothes and uglier shoes. Then she looked at the road ahead. Three Lantern Ranch lay beyond the hills, where she had never belonged, and where no one had yet decided what she was worth. Her hand opened. Wayne's note slipped from her fingers and landed in the dust. For one strange second, Clara wanted to laugh, not because anything was funny, but because the paper looked so small lying there, so small for the hurt it had caused, so small for the power she had given it. Samuel noticed but did not pick it up. He simply held out his hand to help her rise. Clara looked at that hand. It was rough, sun-browned, and steady, not the hand of a rescuer in a fairy tale, just the hand of a man offering her the next step. She placed her fingers in his. As she stood, the last petals fell from her bouquet and scattered across the road. Samuel helped her into the saddle behind him with careful silence. He turned the bay north, away from Willow Creek, away from the church, away from the man who had left her with nothing but a note. The town shrank behind them. Clara did not look back until the first hill hid it from view. And when the wind lifted her veil one last time, it came loose from her hair and flew behind them down the road, pale and fluttering in the dusk, like the ghost of a life that no longer belonged to her. The ride to Three Lantern Ranch was quiet except for the horses' hooves and the soft rattle of tack. Clara sat side-saddle behind Samuel Reed, one hand gripping the back of the saddle, the other holding the skirt of her wedding dress out of the dust as best she could. She had never felt so strange in all her life. That morning, she had dressed to become a wife. By sundown, she was riding away from town behind a man she hardly knew, carrying no promise except work and a locked door. The prairie opened wide around them. The heat of the day faded into a cooler gold. Dry grass bent under the evening wind. A jackrabbit darted across the road and vanished under a patch of scrub. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once, then went silent. Samuel did not ask her questions. That kindness sat heavier on Clara than talk would have. Most folks would have wanted the whole account. They would have asked what Wayne wrote, whether she had suspected anything, whether she had seen signs, whether she had loved him deeply, whether she thought he might come back. They would have picked at her hurt like a loose thread until there was nothing left of her but unraveling. Samuel only rode. When they reached a bend in the road, Clara saw a low house ahead with 3 lanterns hanging from the porch beam. They were unlit, swaying gently in the wind. Behind the house stood a weathered barn, a corral, and beyond that a dark line of fruit trees stretching along the slope. The ranch was not grand, but it looked honest. The fences needed mending in places. One shutter hung crooked. Still, there was care in it. The water trough was full. The porch was swept. A row of tin cups sat upside down near the pump. As they neared the yard, a gray-haired woman stepped onto the porch with a shawl around her shoulders and a wooden spoon in her hand. She looked first at Samuel, then at Clara's wedding dress. Her eyes narrowed. "Samuel Reed," she called, "you better have a clean explanation for bringing a bride home after supper." Samuel helped Clara down before answering. "She is not my bride, Mrs. Larkin." The woman gave Clara another look, softer this time, but still sharp around the edges. "No, I reckon not. A bride brought home proper smiles more than that." Clara lowered her eyes. Shame rose in her face, quick and hot. Samuel stepped aside, not in front of Clara, but near enough that she did not feel alone. "Miss Whitcomb had a hard day in Willow Creek. She needs a room tonight. I offered work in the leather room." Mrs. Larkin's expression changed. She had lived long enough to hear what was not said. The spoon dropped a little in her hand. "Wayne Bell?" she asked. Clara flinched before she could stop herself. That was answer enough. The old woman's mouth tightened. That boy had a weak chin and weaker sense. I knew it the first day I saw him buy boots he could not pay for. A tiny breath escaped Clara. It was not quite laughter, but it was the nearest thing she had felt to it all day. Mrs. Larkin turned toward the house. "Well, don't stand there like fence posts. Come in before the stew turns mean." Inside, the ranch house smelled of beans, coffee, smoke, and old pine. Clara paused in the doorway. A rifle hung above the mantel, polished but untouched. A faded photograph of a stern man and a gentle-looking woman sat on a shelf. There were boot marks near the threshold and a stack of folded blankets on a chair. A home lived in by working hands. Mrs. Larkin led her down a narrow hall to a small back room. It had a bed with a clean quilt, a washstand, a wooden chair, and a window looking toward the orchard. On the door was a brass lock, worn but solid. "This room was Samuel's mother's sewing room once," Mrs. Larkin said. "A bit plain, but the roof holds. That window sticks when it rains, and the floorboard by the bed complains if you step on it. Otherwise, it behaves." Clara stood in the middle of the room, staring at the bed. A room, a door, a lock. After a whole day of being watched, the sight of a place where she could close the world out nearly undid her. Mrs. Larkin's voice softened. "There's warm water coming. You need help with that dress." Clara looked down at the lace, dusty now at the hem, wrinkled where she had sat on the stone, no longer a bride's dress but a witness. "No," she said quietly, "thank you." Mrs. Larkin nodded. "Supper will wait 10 minutes, not more. Grief is one thing, but cold beans help no soul." When the old woman left, Clara closed the door and turned the key. The small click sounded louder than the church bell. For a long moment she stood without moving. Then she reached behind her neck and began to unfasten the tiny buttons of the dress. Her fingers stumbled over them. Halfway down they began to shake. Not much, just enough that she had to stop and press both hands against the wall. She would not cry, she told herself. She had not cried in the chapel. She had not cried on the road. She would not cry now because a kind old woman had given her warm water and a room that smelled faintly of cedar. But her body had no respect for pride. The first sob came without sound, just a sharp bend in her chest. Then another. She covered her mouth with her hand and sank onto the edge of the bed, still half caught in the wedding dress, still wearing shoes full of dust. She cried for her father's empty shop. She cried for her mother, who would have known how to hold her. She cried for the town's eyes, for the note, for the boy who carried it, for the part of herself that had believed Wayne Bell because believing him had been easier than being alone. When the tears finally passed, she washed her face and changed into the plain blue dress from the small bundle Samuel had fetched from the boarding house after sending one of his hands into town. He had not gone himself. Clara understood why. He had spared her the sight of him carrying her life away under the noses of people hungry for more talk. At supper, Samuel sat at one end of the table, Mrs. Larkin at the other, and Clara between them. A ranch hand named Eli Boone came in late, a tall, friendly man with dust in his beard and a limp he tried to hide. He stopped when he saw Clara, then politely removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said. No question, no smirk, no pity. Just ma'am. Clara nearly cried again over that small mercy. They ate stew with thick bread. Mrs. Larkin talked mostly to fill the silence, telling Samuel the hens had found a new hole in the fence and the pump handle needed tightening. Eli said the south gate was hanging by stubbornness alone. Samuel answered in short sentences. Every once in a while, Clara felt him glance her way, not to study her, but to make sure she had enough on her plate. After supper, Samuel took a lantern and led her across the yard to a small room built onto the side of the barn. He opened the door and held the light high. "This was meant for tack repair," he said. "Mostly became a place to lose things." The room was dusty, but Clara saw the bones of it at once. A long workbench, pegs on the wall, a cracked stool, a few awls dull but usable, a leather clamp with one screw missing, a stack of old harness straps in a corner. The smell of worn leather rose around her, dry and familiar. Her breath caught. Samuel noticed, "It is not much." "No," Clara said, stepping inside. She touched the bench with her fingertips. Dust marked her skin. "It is more than much." On the bench lay a saddle with a torn skirt and rough stitching where someone had tried to mend it badly. Clara leaned closer, and for the first time since noon, her mind moved toward something besides pain. "Who did this?" she asked. Samuel looked almost embarrassed. "I did." "You used twine." I had twine. And a nail. It was sharp. Despite herself, Clara looked at him. Samuel's face stayed serious, but something almost amused moved in his eyes. I told you I needed help. She ran her hand over the tear, judging the leather. It can be fixed, not pretty, but fixed. Can you do it? Yes. The answer came before doubt could stop it. There in that dusty room, with a lantern flame trembling beside her, Clara felt a small piece of herself return. Not the bride, not the abandoned woman, something older. The girl who had sat beside her father while he cut leather in long, smooth lines. The girl who knew how to pull thread tight and make broken things hold. Samuel set the lantern on a hook. Then tomorrow we start proper. Wages are $20 a month plus room and meals. If that is unfair, say so. Clara blinked. 20. Too little. It is more than I expected. Then keep your surprise quiet before I learn better. Again, that almost smile. Clara looked down, but warmth touched her face that had nothing to do with shame. As they walked back toward the house, the orchard shifted in the darkness beyond the barn. Its trees stood bent and thin, their branches black against the last streak of sky. They looked tired, forgotten, like they had once promised fruit and then stopped believing anyone wanted it. Clara slowed. Samuel followed her gaze. Why haven't you? He was quiet a moment, because he planted them. Clara understood that kind of keeping. A thing did not have to be useful for love to hold on. Maybe they're not done, she said. Samuel looked at her, but she kept her eyes on the trees. Maybe, he answered. That night Clara lay in the little back room with the door locked and the window cracked open. She could hear the house settling. Mrs. Larkin coughed once down the hall. A horse shifted outside. Far off, a lantern on the porch knocked softly against its hook in the wind. On the chair beside the bed lay her wedding dress, folded as neatly as she could manage. She had meant to hide Wayne's note in the pocket, but then remembered she had left it in the road. The thought did not hurt as much as it should have. Clara turned onto her side and looked through the window toward the orchard. The trees were shadows, but she could feel them there, silent and waiting. She had come to Three Lantern Ranch with no future. But somewhere beyond that window were broken saddles, worn harness, tired trees, and people who had not asked her to explain her shame before offering her supper. For the first time all day, Clara closed her eyes. And just before sleep took her, she heard something strange outside the window. A faint tapping. Once, twice. Then the low murmur of a man's voice in the yard, followed by Samuel saying sharply, "You are not welcome here." Clara sat up in the dark, heart pounding, because the voice that answered was one she knew too well. Wayne Bell had come to the ranch. Wayne Bell stood in the yard with moonlight on his hat brim and dust on his boots, looking like a man who had ridden hard and still somehow believed the world owed him a clean welcome. Clara stayed frozen on the edge of the bed. The room was dark except for a thin line of silver across the floor. Her heart beat so loudly she could hardly hear the men outside. She moved carefully to the window and stood beside it, hidden by the curtain Mrs. Larkin had sewn from old flour sacks. Samuel stood near the porch steps with a lantern in his hand. His shoulders were square, but he had not reached for the rifle above the mantel. Eli Boone was behind him near the barn, silent as a fence post, one hand resting on the rail. Wayne looked from one man to the other and gave a thin laugh. "I only came to speak with Clara." Samuel's voice was calm. "Miss Whitcomb is inside. She is resting. Whatever you failed to say at the church can wait until morning if she chooses to hear it." That last part was not loud, but Clara heard it clearly. "If she chooses." The words settled over her like a blanket. No man had ever placed her choice so plainly in the center of a thing. Wayne shifted his weight. "This is between me and her." "No," Samuel said. "It stopped being private when you left her standing before the whole town and sent a boy with a note." Wayne's face tightened in the lantern glow. "You always this righteous, Reed, or only when there's a woman in your back room?" Eli stepped forward, but Samuel lifted one hand, stopping him. Clara's cheeks burned, even in the dark. Samuel did not raise his voice. Careful. Wayne smiled like he had found a soft spot. Folks in Willow Creek will have plenty to say come morning, jilted at noon and tucked away on a bachelor's ranch by night. That story will walk faster than any horse. For a moment, Clara could not breathe. That was why he had come, not for sorrow, not regret. He had come because she had not stayed where he left her. He had come because her ruin was supposed to remain neat, visible, and useful to him. If she had somewhere to go, then maybe he had not destroyed her after all, and Wayne Bell could not bear that. Samuel lowered the lantern until the light reached Wayne's boots. You should have thought about talk before you made a church full of witnesses to your cowardice. Wayne's smile vanished. I had my reasons. Then carry them back to town. Wayne looked toward Clara's window. She stepped farther behind the curtain, though she knew he could not see her. Clara, he called louder now, come out here, don't make this uglier. Mrs. Larkin's door creaked open down the hall behind Clara. The old woman appeared in a night wrapper, gray braid over one shoulder, holding a candlestick and wearing the face of a person who had buried fear long ago and had no patience left for it. Child, she whispered, you do not have to go out. Clara pressed a hand to her stomach. Outside, Wayne called again. I made a mistake, maybe, but you riding off with Reed makes you look worse than me. There it was, plain as a snake on warm stone. Not I hurt you. Not forgive me. You make me look worse. Something inside Clara, cracked and sore since the chapel, went still. She looked at Mrs. Larkin. May I borrow your shawl? The old woman studied her face, then gave one firm nod. Clara wrapped the shawl over her plain blue dress and unlocked the door. The click sounded different this time, not like shelter, like decision. When she stepped onto the porch, Samuel turned at once. In the lantern light, his eyes asked a question without words. Are you certain? Clara answered by walking past him, down one step then another. She stopped where the porch shadow ended. Her hair was loose over one shoulder. Her eyes still ached from crying, but her voice did not shake. You should not have come, Wayne. Wayne's expression changed as he looked at her. For the first time that day, Clara saw surprise on his face. He had expected tears. He had expected pleading. Maybe he had expected her still in the wedding dress, waiting for whatever scraps of explanation he threw down. Instead, she stood in Mrs. Larkin's shawl with dust still on the hem of her blue dress, and a quiet ranch house behind her. Wayne took off his hat and held it against his thigh. It was the gesture of a gentleman, but it came too late and sat badly on him. I came because you left town before I could explain. A laugh almost rose in Clara's throat, but it had no humor in it. You had until noon to explain. Then you had 40 minutes more while I stood there. His gaze flicked toward Samuel, annoyed. I was pressed hard. Harlan made an offer. A man has to think of his future. So do I, Clara said. Wayne blinked. She stepped down into the yard, though Samuel quietly moved to the side so the lantern light stayed on her path. You wrote 5 lines, Clara said. 5 lines after a year of promises. You let me put on that dress. You let the town gather. You let Reverend Pike open his Bible. Then you sent Tommy like a coward because a boy could do what you would not. Wayne's jaw worked. I said I made a mistake. No, Clara replied. You said maybe. The wind moved across the yard. One of the porch lanterns swung on its hook, though it had not been lit. Wayne lowered his voice. Clara, don't be foolish. Whatever you think you found here, it won't last. Reed is offering you pity because he saw a scene. Men get noble when a crowd is watching, but the crowd is gone now. Samuel did not move. Eli muttered something under his breath, but Mrs. Larkin silenced him with a sharp look from the doorway. Clara felt the insult land, but not where Wayne meant it to. It did not make her doubt Samuel. It made her see Wayne clearly. You think every decent act hides a bargain because yours always did. Wayne's face darkened. Clara had never spoken to him that way. She had spent a year smoothing his pride, softening her answers, making herself pleasant around his moods because she had believed love meant being easy to keep. Now, standing in the dust at 3 Lantern Ranch, she felt how tired she had been. Wayne stepped closer. You'll regret this. Samuel's voice cut in steady and low. That is close enough. Wayne stopped, but his eyes stayed on Clara. You have nothing, you hear me? Nothing but a ruined name and a stranger's charity. Clara looked toward the barn where the small leather room waited in darkness. She thought of the torn saddle on the bench, the tools, the smell of old leather, her father's voice telling her the stitch had to be strong enough to hold when the rider needed it most. Then she looked back at Wayne. I have work. Wayne scoffed. I have a room with a lock, she continued. I have wages promised for hands you once told me were too rough for a wife. I have Mrs. Larkin's stew cooling in my belly and 2 men in this yard who have managed more honor in one evening than you found in a year. Samuel's eyes lowered for a moment, as though the words humbled him more than praised him. Clara drew Mrs. Larkin's shawl tighter around herself. And I have no wish to hear another word from you tonight. Wayne stared at her as if she had slapped him. You'll come crawling back when the town shuts its doors. Then I will build a new door, Clara said. The words surprised even her. They came from somewhere deeper than anger, somewhere wounded, yes, but alive. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Mrs. Larkin called from the porch. Well, Mr. Bell, I have beans to scrape and floors to sleep above. Take your horse and whatever is left of your manners with you. Eli gave a soft cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Wayne put his hat back on too hard. He looked at Samuel. You think taking in another man's cast-off makes you noble. Samuel's face went still. Clara felt the words strike like a stone, but Samuel answered before she could. She is not a cast-off. She is a craftsman under my roof. Speak of her wrongly again, and you will find every decent door in this county closed to you before you reach town. There was no threat of violence in it. That made it worse for Wayne. Samuel was not trying to frighten him. He was simply stating what kind of man he intended to be. Wayne spat into the dust, climbed into his saddle, and turned his horse toward the road. Before he rode off, he looked back at Clara. This ain't over. Clara stood still until the hoofbeats faded. Only then did her knees weaken. Samuel noticed at once but did not touch her. Miss Whitcomb. I am all right, she said, though she was not. Mrs. Larkin came down the porch steps and wrapped one arm around her shoulders with no permission asked and none needed. No, you're not, but you will be, and there's a difference. Clara covered her mouth, not to cry this time, but to hold herself together. Samuel looked toward the road where Wayne had gone. I am sorry he followed you here. You didn't bring him, Clara said. No, but my offer may bring more talk than I intended. Clara turned to him. There would have been talk no matter where I slept tonight. At least here I was allowed to speak. The ranch yard fell quiet again. The moon had lifted higher, silvering the roof of the barn and the worn rails of the corral. A horse shifted in the shadows. Somewhere in the orchard, leaves whispered against one another like low voices. Clara looked toward those trees. In the dark, they seemed less dead than waiting. Samuel followed her gaze. Tomorrow, he said, we can take your trunk to the back room and clear the workbench. Clara nodded, tomorrow. The word felt larger than it should have. There had been hours that day when she did not believe tomorrow belonged to her. Mrs. Larkin guided her back inside. At the doorway, Clara paused and looked once more at the road. The place where Wayne had disappeared was empty now, but his last words still hung in the air. This ain't over. She knew he meant to trouble her. Men like Wayne did not forgive a woman for standing up after they pushed her down. He would talk. He would twist the story. He would find some way to make her new beginning look like another shame. But Clara also knew something else now. She had answered him once, and the sky had not fallen. If this moment touched your heart, stay with Clara's journey, because the cruelest part of that wedding day was not the note Wayne sent. It was the secret he was still hiding. That night, Clara did not sleep easily. She lay awake long after Mrs. Larkin's candle went out and Eli's footsteps crossed the porch. The house settled around her with soft cracks and sighs. Her wedding dress lay folded on the chair, a pale heap in the moonlight. Near dawn, when the world outside was gray and cold, Clara finally rose. She took the dress in both hands and carried it to the small trunk at the foot of the bed. As she folded it deeper away, Her fingers brushed something tucked into the lining near the bodice. Clara frowned. She had not sewn a pocket there. Slowly, she pulled the hidden thing free. It was not Wayne's note. It was a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, marked in her father's hand. For Clara, when the day comes that she has nowhere else to turn. Clara held the envelope, as if it might vanish if her fingers closed too tightly. Dawn light crept through the small window, gray and thin, touching the floorboards, the washstand, the plain quilt, and the wedding dress lying open across the trunk. Outside, the ranch was beginning to wake. A rooster called from somewhere near the shed. A horse blew air through its nose. The first wagon wheel of the day creaked in the yard. But inside that little room, time had gone still. Her father's handwriting sat before her, familiar as his voice. For Clara, when the day comes that she has nowhere else to turn. She sank onto the bed. The envelope had been sewn into the lining of the dress so carefully that she might never have found it if she had not decided to hide the dress away. Her mother's sister had given her that dress after Clara's mother died, saying it was only old lace and memories. Clara had mended it for her wedding, never knowing her father had placed something inside it. Her throat tightened. "When did you put this here, Pa?" she whispered. No answer came, except the wind moving faintly at the window. The seal was old and dry. Clara broke it with care. Inside was a folded letter and a smaller paper, stiff and marked with legal words. She opened the letter first. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then I have failed to be standing beside you when life turns hard. That thought pains me more than any sickness ever could. A father likes to believe his hands can hold back every storm from his child, but mine have grown weak, and there are truths I should have spoken while I still had breath enough to say them plainly." Clara stopped, the words blurred at once. She pressed the heel of her hand to her eyes and forced herself to keep reading. "Your mother came to me with this dress when we were young. She said a woman ought to have one thing in the world that no debt collector could claim because it carried love instead of money. She was right. I have hidden this letter in it because I trust cloth that held her prayers more than I trust men who write contracts. There is a small parcel of land west of Willow Creek near Dry Mercy Spring. It is not much to look at. 12 acres, a ruined shed, and a line of cottonwoods, but it belonged to your mother before she married me. I never sold it, though I let folks believe everything was gone. The deed is enclosed. I kept it from my creditors because it was never mine to lose. It is yours." Clara lowered the letter. Her breathing changed. Land. Not a dream, not a promise. Land with her mother's name in the paper. Land that had somehow survived the debts, the sickness, the selling of the shop, and all the long months Clara had believed she owned nothing but a trunk of clothes. She unfolded the stiff paper. Her hands trembled as she read the names, the boundaries, the seal. She understood only part of it, but she understood enough. It was real. She returned to the letter. "There is more. I fear I made a grave mistake in trusting Silas Voss with the record. He holds my last account book and knows of the land. He advised me to sign certain papers when fever had me low. I did not. If he says otherwise, do not believe him. I saw hunger in that man's eyes when he looked at what was not his. If you have nowhere else to turn, find someone steady. Not someone grand, not someone sweet-tongued, steady. A person whose kindness does not rush you. Show them this. Make a life by your own hands if you can. You were never meant to be carried like a burden, Clara. You were meant to build." Her tears came then, quiet and full. She held the letter to her chest and bent over it, not with the breaking sobs of the night before, but with grief that had a root to it. Her father had known. Somehow, even near the end, he had known there might come a day when Clara would need more than memory. A soft knock sounded at the door. Clara wiped her cheeks. "Yes." Mrs. Larkin opened the door just a hand's width. "Breakfast is near ready. I brought coffee, though you look like you found trouble before sunrise." Clara did not know how to speak. She only held out the letter. The old woman stepped inside, set the coffee on the washstand, and took the pages. Her eyes moved slowly over the writing. The longer she read, the deeper the lines around her mouth became. When she finished, she looked at Clara with a seriousness that made the room feel colder. "Silas Voss," she said. "You know him." Everybody knows him. That's the trouble. A man can sit behind a bank desk long enough and folks start mistaking clean cuffs for clean hands. Clara folded the deed against her lap. My father says the land is mine. If that paper is true, it is. Then why did he hide it? Mrs. Larkin looked toward the window. Because land has a way of drawing wolves. At breakfast, Samuel noticed at once that something had changed. He said nothing while Clara ate 2 bites of biscuit and forgot the rest. Eli talked about a broken rail near the north pasture, but his eyes moved between them, sensing weather. After the plates were cleared, Clara asked Samuel if she might speak to him in the leather room. He did not ask why. The morning sun was bright across the yard as they walked to the barn. The world seemed too ordinary for what she carried. Chickens scratched near the pump. A blue shirt hung on the line. Dust clung to the hem of her blue dress. The torn saddle still waited on the workbench, patient and wounded. Inside the leather room, Clara laid the letter and deed on the bench. Samuel read slowly. He did not rush. He did not whistle or exclaim. He read the letter twice, then studied the deed with a frown. Dry Mercy Spring, he said. That's rough land. But it is land. Yes, he said, and land means something. Clara watched him. Do you think it is real? I think your father believed it was. That is not the same as a court record, but it is a place to start. The careful answer steadied her more than false certainty would have. My father mentioned Silas Voss, she said. Wayne was meeting with Mr. Voss often before the wedding. I thought it was about a loan for a house. Samuel's jaw tightened just a little. Clara saw it. What is it? Samuel rested one hand on the edge of the bench. Voss has been buying land west of town quietly for years, dry land mostly, places folks thought were worthless. Why? There was talk last winter that the rail company might run a spur through that direction. Nothing proved, but men like Voss hear things before farmers do. Clara looked down at the deed. A strange chill moved through her. Wayne had not simply left her for Harlan's niece. Wayne had been close to Silas Voss. Her father's letter warned of Voss. And now there was land nobody had told Clara about, land in the same direction where a banker might profit if he could gather enough of it. Her shame from the wedding began to shift shape. It had not vanished, but something darker stood behind it now, something planned. You think Wayne knew? She asked. Samuel did not answer quickly. I think a man who sends a boy with a note is capable of many small cowardices, he said at last. Whether he is capable of this one, we need proof. Clara touched her father's handwriting. What do I do? What do you want to do? Again, the question came back to her. Not what would a man do for her, not what would the town allow, what did she want? Clara looked around the leather room. Sunlight cut through the cracks in the wall, making bright lines across the bench. Dust floated in them like tiny sparks. The tools were old. The saddle was torn. Everything here needed work, but nothing here was beyond saving. I want to know the truth, she said. Samuel nodded. Then we start there. They agreed not to ride into Willow Creek right away. A woman jilted one day, and waving a deed the next would only feed the town's mouth before they understood what they had. Samuel suggested they speak first with Judge Merritt, a retired circuit judge who lived 7 miles east and had once settled boundary disputes before age bent his back. Clara spent the morning trying to work, but the letter pulled at her thoughts. She cleaned the leather room, sorted the tools, and took stock of what could be mended. Her fingers knew what to do even while her mind wandered. She sharpened an awl. She oiled a stiff strap. She removed Samuel's twine from the torn saddle with a look so stern that Eli, watching from the door, backed away with both hands raised. Was only trying to keep from hitting dirt, he said. A saddle mended wrong can hurt a man worse than a saddle not mended at all, Clara replied. Eli nodded solemnly. Yes, ma'am, I'll fear your needle more than my horse from now on. For the first time since the church, Clara smiled without pain in it. By noon, the ranch seemed less like a hiding place and more like a place with tasks waiting for her name. Mrs. Larkin brought her a tin cup of lemonade and pretended not to notice when Clara tucked her father's letter into the pocket of her apron like a charm. In the afternoon, Samuel harnessed the wagon for the ride to Judge Merritt. S. Clara wore her plainest bonnet and carried the deed inside a Bible, not because she meant to hide behind Scripture, but because Mrs. Larkin said no thief with sense would look there first. The road east wound through dry fields and low hills. Samuel drove. Clara sat beside him with both hands folded over the Bible. For a while, neither spoke. Then Samuel said, "I owe you something." Clara turned, "You owe me nothing. I owe you the truth about my own trouble with Voss." The reins rested loose in his hands, but his face had gone hard in a way she had not seen before. 3 years ago, I nearly lost Three Lantern Ranch, he said. My mother had taken sick before she passed and debts followed. Voss offered to buy the orchard land, said it was useless and would ease my burden. I refused. After that, cattle buyers stopped coming fair. Supply costs went up. A note I had paid was somehow marked unpaid. Clara listened, the wagon wheels grinding over stones. I could never prove he had a hand in it, Samuel continued. But the pressure always came after I refused to sell. Why would he want your orchard? It sits along the same west route. If the rail talk is true, a line near Three Lantern could turn poor land into gold. Clara looked toward the horizon, where heat shimmered above the grass. So my mother's land and your orchard both stand in his way. Samuel gave a grim nod. Maybe. Clara thought of Wayne's face in the yard. You have nothing, he had said. Nothing but a ruined name and a stranger's charity. Had he known even then that she had more than nothing? Had he come to frighten her away before she found out? The thought made her fingers tighten around the Bible. They reached Judge Merritt's house in the late afternoon. It was a small place shaded by cottonwoods, with law books stacked in the window and a mule tied near the fence. The judge himself answered the door, thin and bent, wearing spectacles low on his nose. He listened to Samuel first, then to Clara. He read the letter, then the deed. He asked 3 questions about her mother's family, 2 about the location of the dress, and 1 about whether anyone else knew. When Clara told him about Wayne's visit, the old judge removed his spectacles and rubbed them with a cloth. Miss Whitcomb, he said, this deed appears proper, but there may be a second filing in the county book. We must inspect the record before Voss learns you have this. Why before? Because if your father's fear was well placed, Voss may already have prepared a false claim. Men who steal land prefer paperwork to pistols. It looks cleaner. Samuel looked toward the window. Clara felt the room grow smaller. Judge Merritt folded the deed carefully. Tomorrow morning you will go to the county office. Not alone, not loudly. Ask for the old land register under your mother's maiden name. If the clerk refuses, send for me. Clara nodded, though her stomach had tightened. The judge looked directly at her, and Miss Whitcomb. Yes, sir. Do not let shame make you quiet. Shame is useful to men who count on decent people hiding their wounds. The words followed Clara all the way back to the wagon. As they drove home, the sky turned copper. Clouds gathered in the west, thick and low. The wind smelled of rain, though the land had nearly forgotten what rain was. Halfway to the ranch, Samuel slowed the horses. A rider stood in the road ahead. Not Wayne's. This man wore a black coat despite the heat, and his horse was glossy and well fed. Clara knew him from the bank window in Willow Creek, though she had never stood close enough to see the cold gray of his eyes. Silas Voss removed his hat with a smile that did not touch his face. Mr. Reed, he said, Miss Whitcomb taking a ride together so soon. Samuel said nothing. Voss's gaze dropped to the Bible in Clara's lap. A fine evening for prayer, he said. Clara held the Bible tighter. The banker smiled a little wider, especially for a young woman whose fortunes changed so suddenly. The first drops of rain struck the dust between them. And Clara understood, with a fear that settled deep and sharp, that Silas Voss already knew about the deed. Rain began softly, but the air between Clara Whitcomb and Silas Voss felt sharp enough to cut. The first drops darkened the dust in small round spots. The horses shifted uneasily. Samuel kept the reins in one hand, calm on the seat beside Clara, but she could feel the change in him. He had gone still in the way a man does when he is not frightened, only measuring danger. Silas Voss sat straight in his saddle, black coat buttoned, silver watch chain glinting against his vest. He looked less like a traveler caught on the road and more like a judge who had been waiting there for them all along. "Mr. Voss," Samuel said at last. "Mr. Reed." Voss tipped his hat toward Clara. "Miss Whitcomb, I heard of your misfortune, a terrible business at the church. This town can be unkind with its tongue." Clara said nothing. His eyes moved again to the Bible in her lap. "But I am pleased to see you are seeking comfort in proper places." Samuel's voice remained even. "We're on our way home." "Home," Voss repeated, as if tasting the word. "That is a generous word for a place one has only slept in once." Clara felt heat rise beneath her collar, but she kept her gaze steady. "Generosity is not a crime, Mr. Voss." "No," Voss said, "though it often hides one." Samuel's hand tightened on the reins. "Say what you came to say." The banker smiled. "Direct as always, very well. Miss Whitcomb, your father owed money at the time of his passing, a sad amount. I handled much of it myself, with patience, I might add. If you have come across any old documents, personal papers, or property records, it would be wise to bring them to my office. These matters are delicate. A young woman in distress can misunderstand legal obligations." Rain tapped against the wagon seat. Clara thought of her father's letter, of the words about men who write contracts, of the warning in that failing hand. "I will have any papers reviewed by Judge Merritt," she said. For the first time, Voss's smile thinned. "Judge Merritt is retired. He can still read." Samuel's mouth moved almost into a smile, but he hid it by looking ahead. Voss leaned slightly forward in his saddle. "Miss Whitcomb, grief makes people stubborn, so does humiliation. You may feel the need to prove you are not helpless after what Mr. Bell did. I understand that, but pride is an expensive lantern to carry into the dark." Clara's fingers pressed into the cover of the Bible. Wayne had called her ruined, Voss called her distressed. Different words, same cage. "I am not carrying pride," Clara said. "I am carrying my father's memory." The rain grew harder. It struck Voss's black hat and rolled from the brim in thin, shining lines. "Memories do not settle debts," he said. "No," Samuel answered, "but paper does, and if her paper is sound, you'll have no cause to trouble her." Voss looked at Samuel then, and something colder than dislike passed across his face. "You have always mistaken stubbornness for virtue, Reed. Your father did the same. Planted trees on land that could have made him rich if he had known when to let go." Samuel did not answer, but Clara saw the words strike deep. Voss turned his horse aside, clearing the road with false courtesy. "Go on, then. I will not keep you from the rain. But Miss Whitcomb, a warning from a man who has seen many families lose more than they had to. Bring me those papers before they bring trouble to you." Clara lifted her chin. "Good evening, Mr. Voss." Samuel flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled past. Clara did not breathe freely until Voss was behind them. Even then, she felt his eyes on her back like cold fingers. For a mile, they rode without speaking. Rain darkened Samuel's coat and gathered along the brim of Clara's bonnet. The road turned slick beneath the wheels. The Bible rested heavy in her lap, and hidden inside it lay the deed that had changed everything. At last, Samuel said, "You held your ground well." "I was afraid." "That doesn't change what I said." Clara looked down at her damp gloves. He knew. "Yes." "How?" Samuel stared ahead through the rain. "Maybe Wayne told him. Maybe the clerk did. Maybe Voss has had your father's affairs watched longer than we guessed. My father trusted him once. Many honest men trust the wrong person before they learn better." Clara thought of Wayne Bell. The sting of it had not faded, but now it had company. Betrayal had layers, it seemed. A person could be fooled by a smile at the church steps and by a clean-cuffed banker behind a desk. One left bruises on the heart. The other could steal the ground under your feet. When they reached Three Lantern Ranch, Mrs. Larkin was waiting on the porch, arms crossed tight beneath her shawl. Eli stood beside her holding a lantern, though the daylight had not fully gone. "You took long enough to drown," Mrs. Larkin called. Samuel helped Clara down. "Voss stopped us on the road." Mrs. Larkin's face hardened. Of course he did. Buzzards smell fresh trouble before it cools. Inside, Clara dried her hair by the kitchen stove while Samuel told them what had happened. Mrs. Larkin listened with narrowed eyes. Eli leaned against the wall, chewing the inside of his cheek. When Samuel mentioned the county record office, Eli pushed away from the wall. "You should not go alone." "She won't," Samuel said. "I mean you should not go with only one man," Eli replied. "Voss owns half the smiles in Willow Creek. The clerk may be one of them." Clara looked at him. "What do you suggest?" Eli hesitated. "My sister works laundry behind the hotel. Folks talk while they wait for shirts. I can ask what's being said without making a show of it." Mrs. Larkin pointed her spoon at him. "You will ask quiet, and you will not get yourself punched in some alley." "I rarely get punched twice by the same man," Eli said. "That is not comfort." For the first time that evening, Clara laughed softly. It surprised everyone, even her. The sound was small, but it warmed the kitchen more than the stove. Samuel looked at her, and for a moment the worry in his eyes eased. Later, after supper, Clara returned to the leather room. Rain drummed on the barn roof. The lantern flame trembled as wind crept under the door. She should have gone to bed, but sleep felt too far away and fear had made her hands restless. So she worked. She took Samuel's torn saddle and began removing the bad stitches. Each tug of thread felt like pulling out a lie. The leather was worn but not worthless. It needed cleaning, softening, a patch cut true, and a stitch that would not pretend to hold but truly hold. Samuel came to the doorway sometime later. "You don't have to work tonight." Clara did not look up. "I know." He stepped inside and stood across the bench. "Then why are you?" "Because this makes sense." He watched her hands move. "Leather." "Broken things," she said. "You can see where they failed, you can see what must be done. People are harder." The rain filled the silence between them. Samuel picked up a dull awl from the bench and turned it in his hand. "My father used to say the same about trees. Said a tree will tell you what hurts it if you stand still long enough." Clara glanced toward the dark orchard beyond the small window. "What do those trees tell you?" Samuel looked out. "That I failed to hear them." The sadness in his voice was quiet, but Clara heard it. "You kept them," she said. "That is not failure." "I kept them dying." Maybe keeping them alive long enough for help to come is its own kind of faith. Samuel turned back to her. For a moment, the lantern light touched his face in a way that made him look tired and younger at the same time. Clara saw then that 3 Lantern Ranch was not just land to him. It was a promise he had been trying to keep with worn hands and too little hope. She softened her voice. "Tomorrow, after the county office, I'd like to look at the orchard." "You know leather, not trees." "My father knew leather. My mother kept a kitchen garden that fed us 3 summers when money was thin. I know enough to look. And sometimes a thing that has stopped giving is not dead. It is only waiting for someone to ask the right question." Samuel rested the awl back on the bench. "You believe that?" Clara looked at the saddle beneath her hands. "I am trying to." He nodded, as if that answer mattered more than certainty. The next morning came washed clean by rain. Willow Creek looked almost innocent beneath the pale sun, but Clara knew better as the wagon rolled into town. People turned to stare. A woman outside the mercantile stopped sweeping. 2 men near the feed store lowered their voices. By noon, everyone would know Clara Whitcomb had returned beside Samuel Reed, wearing no wedding ring and carrying a Bible like a shield. At the county office, the clerk, Mr. Pritchard, looked nervous the moment they stepped inside. "I need the land register for property near Dry Mercy Spring," Clara said, "under the name Eleanor May Whitcomb, formerly Eleanor May Harper." Mr. Pritchard swallowed. "Those old books are not easily pulled." Samuel said, "Pull them." The clerk's gaze flicked toward the back room. "I would need authorization." Clara placed Judge Merritt's written note on the counter. The clerk's face lost color. While he went to fetch the register, Clara heard movement behind the half-closed inner door. A low voice, a chair scraping. Then Wayne Bell stepped out, dressed in a fresh coat, smiling like a man who had been waiting to see her trapped. "Well, Clara," he said, still chasing what does not belong to you?" Before Clara could answer, Mr. Pritchard returned with the old land register open in his shaking hands. And the page where her mother's deed should have been recorded had been neatly cut out. The cut page lay open in the register like a wound. For a moment Clara could not understand what she was seeing. The old book was thick, its pages yellowed and rough along the edges, filled with careful rows of names, dates, borders, and signatures. But where her mother's land should have been, a clean slice ran close to the binding. The page had been removed with a sharp blade. Not torn in haste, cut with care. Mr. Pritchard held the register as if it had grown too heavy for his hands. His thin face had gone pale, and a bead of sweat slipped from his temple, though the office was cool. Samuel leaned over the counter, eyes fixed on the missing page. Wayne Bell smiled. It was not a large smile. That made it uglier. It was the look of a man who had watched a trap close and believed himself safe on the other side of it. "Well," Wayne said, "that seems to settle it." Clara slowly turned toward him. Something inside her wanted to shrink. The old Clara would have felt the room closing in, the eyes pressing on her, the shame rising again like floodwater. A clerk, a cut page, a man who had jilted her now standing fresh and clean, ready to tell the world she was grasping at property that was never hers. But her father's letter was folded inside the Bible under her hand. Her mother's name was written on the deed. And Samuel stood beside her, silent but steady, not stepping in front of her. Clara placed one hand on the counter. "No," she said. Wayne's smile faded a little. "No. No, it does not settle it." Mr. Pritchard swallowed hard. "Miss Whitcomb, the record is incomplete. I cannot confirm any claim from this register." "You cannot confirm it because someone cut out the page," Clara said. The clerk glanced toward Wayne before he could stop himself. Samuel saw it. So did Clara. Wayne's voice sharpened. "Careful what you imply. A missing page in an old book is not proof of a crime." "Then why were you waiting behind that door?" Clara asked. Wayne's mouth tightened. "I had business. With my mother's land. With the county clerk." Samuel finally spoke, quiet and heavy. "On the very morning Miss Whitcomb came to inspect a record you say does not concern you." Wayne looked at him with dislike. "You have made yourself very busy in her affairs, Reed." Samuel did not answer. He only held Wayne's stare until the smaller man looked away first. Clara turned back to Mr. Pritchard. "Who had access to this register?" The clerk wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "The office keeps public records. Many persons may request to view them." "Who requested this one recently?" "I cannot recall." Wayne gave a small laugh. "There, Clara, you have your answer. Go back to your sewing bench." The words struck wrong. Not because they hurt her, but because they showed his hand. He had never remembered her father's craft with respect. To Wayne, her skill had always been a thing to tuck away once she became his wife. A useful little talent, not a life, not a strength. Clara looked at the clerk. "Mr. Pritchard, are you refusing to answer, or are you afraid to answer?" The office went still. Outside, a wagon passed, wheels rattling over the street. A horse snorted near the hitching rail. Sunlight lay across the clerk's desk, showing dust, ink stains, and one small curled shaving of paper near the edge of the register. Clara saw it. A thin, yellow shaving, fresh enough that it had not darkened like the old pages. She reached toward it. Mr. Pritchard flinched. "Please don't touch anything." Samuel looked at the shaving, then at the cut in the register. "Someone did this recently," he said. Wayne stepped forward. "This is foolishness." The back door opened before he could say more. Judge Merritt entered with Eli Boone behind him. The old judge looked bent and slow until his eyes found the open register. Then all softness left him. "I see," he said. Mr. Pritchard looked as though he might faint. "Judge Merritt, I was just explaining." "No," the judge said, "you were just sweating." Eli tipped his hat to Clara, then stayed near the door, watching Wayne with open dislike. Judge Merritt came to the counter and examined the cut page without touching it. His face darkened. This page was removed with a penknife, he said. Not long ago. Wayne gave a cold little shrug. Can you prove who did it? Not yet. Then perhaps old age has made the book fragile. Judge Merritt looked at him over his spectacles. Young man, I have seen fragile books and guilty men. You are not a book. Eli coughed into his fist. Clara might have smiled if her stomach had not been tied in knots. Judge Merritt turned to the clerk. Pritchard, by county rule, every land entry has an index line in the front register, a tax duplicate in the assessor's cabinet, and a copy of transfer in the courthouse vault. The clerk's mouth opened, then closed. Clara felt hope move like a match being struck. Samuel glanced at her, and she saw he had heard it too. Wayne's face changed before he could hide it. The vault key, Judge Merritt said. Mr. Pritchard shook his head. I cannot open the vault without authorization from Mr. Voss. The judge's eyes narrowed. Silas Voss is a banker, he is not the county. He sits on the records committee, the clerk whispered. And I sat on the bench for 30 years. Get the key. The clerk stood frozen. Wayne moved toward the door. This has nothing to do with me. Eli shifted, blocking his path with a friendly smile that did not reach his eyes. Leaving so soon seems a shame. Story's just getting readable. Wayne's hand curled at his side. Move. Can't, bad leg, takes me a while. Samuel did not laugh, but something in his face warmed for half a breath. Mr. Pritchard looked from Wayne to Judge Merritt, then to Clara. Something broke in his expression. Not courage exactly, but maybe fear turning in another direction. I don't have the vault key, he said. Who does? Judge Merritt asked. The clerk lowered his eyes. Mr. Voss took it yesterday afternoon. There it was. No thunder cracked. No crowd gasped. Yet Clara felt the truth land with more weight than any shout could have carried. Samuel's jaw tightened. Judge Merritt closed the register with care. Then we will fetch it. Wayne pushed past Eli suddenly, catching him off guard. He reached the door, but Clara spoke before he escaped. Wayne. He stopped. She stepped away from the counter. The Bible remained in her hand. She could feel the deed inside it, warm from her palm. Did you know? She asked. His back was to her. For a moment, she thought he would not answer. Then he turned, and his face wore the injured look he used whenever he wanted pity. Know what? That my father left land in my mother's name. His eyes flicked down, not much, just enough. Clara felt the last thin thread between them snap. You did, she whispered. Wayne's expression hardened. You would not have known what to do with it. The words filled the office like smoke. Even Mr. Pritchard looked up. Clara stared at the man she had almost married, the man she had trusted because she had been tired, lonely, frightened, and desperate for the shape of a home. She had thought his worst sin was leaving her at the altar. Now she understood that leaving her there had only been the part everyone could see. What was supposed to happen, she asked, after the wedding? Wayne looked away. Samuel's voice was low. Answer her. Wayne gave a bitter laugh. You all act like land is love. It's dirt, dry dirt. Voss said it might matter one day if the rail came. Clara would have signed whatever a husband put before her. That is how marriage works. Clara felt the room sway. Her hand tightened around the Bible, so hard the cover bent. Judge Merritt's face went red. That is not how law works, and it is not how decency works. Wayne pointed at Clara, anger finally stripped of charm. She had nothing. I was going to give her a name. You were going to take mine, Clara said. Her voice was soft, but it stopped him. Wayne had no answer. Outside, the town moved on, unaware that inside the little county office, a woman's whole life had turned again. Not with a wedding bell this time. Not with a note. With a truth so plain it burned. Wayne had not left because she was worthless. He had planned to marry her because she was worth more than she knew. And when a richer chance came, he had left before the papers could be found, trusting shame to keep her quiet and Voss to finish the theft. Judge Merritt took the Bible gently from Clara's hand and removed the deed. He studied it once more, then folded it inside his coat. "I will hold this for safekeeping until we reach the vault," he said. "Not because you cannot, Miss Whitcomb, because it may be harder to steal from an old judge in daylight." Clara nodded. Wayne opened the door. This time, nobody stopped him. But before he stepped out, Judge Merritt called Mr. Bell. Wayne turned with a sneer. The judge's voice was cold. "Leave town if you are wise. Stay if you wish to learn how slowly truth can skin a lie." Wayne's face paled, then he left. The clerk sank into his chair. Samuel looked at Clara. "Do you want to go back to the ranch?" Every part of her was tired. Her head ached. Her heart felt scraped raw. She wanted the back room, the locked door, Mrs. Larkin's stern kindness, and the quiet smell of leather. But then she remembered Voss on the road, smiling at the Bible in her lap. She remembered her father's warning. She remembered Wayne saying she would have signed whatever a husband put before her. "No," she said, "I want the vault key." Judge Merritt gave one sharp nod, as if he had been waiting for that answer. They found Silas Voss at the bank. The Willow Creek bank stood across from the mercantile, clean and square, with polished windows and brass letters on the door. Inside, the air smelled of ink, paper, and cold metal. Voss sat behind his desk as if he had never waited in a rain-dark road, as if he had never threatened a young woman with soft words and sharp eyes. He looked up when Clara entered with Samuel, Eli, Judge Merritt, and Mr. Pritchard trailing behind. His gaze moved over them, counting trouble. "Judge," he said, "this is an unexpected procession." Judge Merritt held out his hand, the county vault key. Voss leaned back. "For what purpose?" "To inspect a land copy related to a leaner May Harper Whitcomb." Voss folded his hands. "That matter is complicated." "Most theft is," the judge said. The bank went silent. A teller behind the counter froze with a stack of notes in his hand. Voss's eyes cooled. "Careful, Merritt." "No," Clara said. Everyone looked at her. She stepped forward before fear could pull her back. "No more careful words, no more delicate talk. My father hid a letter because he feared you. The county record has been cut. The clerk says you took the vault key. Wayne Bell knew about land he had no right to know about. So if this is innocent, open the vault and let the paper prove it." Voss watched her with a kind of interest that made her skin prickle. "You have grown bold since yesterday," he said. "No," Clara answered. "I have grown tired." A faint sound came from behind her. Eli shifting his weight, Samuel breathing slow, Judge Merritt waiting. Voss opened a drawer. For one wild second, Clara thought of the gun above Samuel's mantel, but Voss did not pull a weapon. He took out a key tied with a red string and laid it on the desk. "You may look," he said. "You will find nothing useful." Judge Merritt took the key. As they turned to leave, Voss spoke again. "Miss Whitcomb." Clara stopped. "Your father was a sick man near the end. Sick men imagine enemies, they misplace papers, they create burdens for their children." Clara looked back at him. "My father built saddles that held men safely through storms," she said. "He did not misplace what mattered." Then she walked out. If you believe one hidden truth can change a life, stay with Clara now, because the next paper they found would not only threaten her land, it would reveal why Samuel Reed's orchard had been dying for years. The courthouse vault smelled of damp stone and old dust. Judge Merritt unlocked it himself while Mr. Pritchard held the lamp with both hands. Shelves of bound papers lined the walls. Tax rolls, transfer copies, marriage bonds, boundary maps, the quiet bones of the county. They searched under Harper first. Then Whitcomb. Then Dry Mercy Spring. Clara's hope rose and fell with every bundle opened. At last, Samuel, who had been silent near the back shelf, pulled a folded map from between two ledgers. "Judge," he said. Merritt came close. He opened the map on a table and Clara saw lines inked across the county, parcels marked in different hands. Dry Mercy Spring, Three Lantern Orchard, the Western Ridge, the Old Stage Road. A proposed rail spur ran straight through them. Beside several plots were small marks in red. Samuel's orchard was marked. Her mother's land was marked. And at the bottom of the map, in Silas Voss's neat handwriting, were 3 words that made Clara's blood run cold. Acquire before filing. The words on the map seemed to darken as Clara stared at them. Acquire before filing. No one spoke at first. The courthouse vault held its silence like a grave. The lamp in Mr. Pritchard's hand shook enough to make the shadows move along the stone walls. Dust hung in the air. Outside the thick door, Willow Creek went on with its wagons, bells, footsteps, and gossip, not knowing that half its future had been planned in ink behind locked doors. Judge Merritt bent closer to the map. His old finger followed the proposed rail line from the western ridge down across Dry Mercy Spring, then straight along the edge of Three Lantern Ranch. This was never filed with the county, he said. Samuel stood opposite him, face hard and pale, but Voss had it. Yes, the judge said, and by these markings, he knew exactly which parcels he wanted before the rail company made its route public. Clara looked at the red marks. Her mother's 12 acres were circled twice. Samuel's orchard bore a heavy red cross, as if someone had already decided it should be taken. Her voice came out quiet. Wayne knew my land mattered. Judge Merritt looked at her with sorrow. It appears so. The truth should have brought anger, but for a moment Clara only felt tired, deeply tired. She thought of the church, the dress, the note, the town watching her humiliation. All that shame had felt like the worst day of her life. Now she saw it had also been a curtain. Behind it, men had moved papers, whispered plans, and counted on her grief to keep her blind. Samuel reached toward the map but stopped before touching it. That line runs through my father's lower orchard. More than through it, Eli said from the doorway. His usual humor was gone. It cuts the ranch in half. Samuel's eyes stayed on the inked line. He tried to buy it 3 years ago. Judge Merritt nodded grimly, and when you refused, pressure came. Clara remembered what Samuel had told her on the wagon ride. Buyers vanished. Supply costs rose. A paid note was marked unpaid, trouble arriving each time he held his ground. She looked down at the map again, but why would that make the orchard fail? Samuel's gaze lifted. Judge Merritt turned to him. Your orchard has been poor for years. 5, maybe 6. It blooms some, then drops fruit early. Leaves curl on the west side. I thought it was bad soil or old roots. Mr. Pritchard made a small sound. Everyone looked at him. The clerk's face went gray. Judge Merritt straightened. Speak. Mr. Pritchard clutched the lamp. I don't know anything for certain. That is a coward's door, Mrs. Larkin would have said had she been there. Clara stepped toward him. Mr. Pritchard, people have already been hurt by men speaking half-truths. If you know something, say it. The clerk's eyes shone with sweat and fear. There were shipments. Samuel's voice lowered. What shipments? Barrels, Pritchard whispered. Delivered to the old wash shed behind the bank, then hauled out west at night. I saw ledgers once. Not official bank ledgers, private accounts. Payments to a man named Clyde Rusk. Eli stiffened. Rusk works odd jobs, mean fellow, used to poison prairie dogs for ranchers. Clara felt the vault grow colder. Samuel understood before she did. His hand curled slowly at his side. Judge Merritt's face became stern. Are you saying someone poisoned Mr. Reed's orchard? Pritchard looked at Samuel and then away. I only know Rusk was paid after your refusals to sell, and I heard Mr. Voss say a dying orchard makes a stubborn man practical. The lamp flame flickered. Samuel said nothing. That silence frightened Clara more than anger would have. He looked like a man standing before his father's grave and learning someone had been digging at it for years. Clara moved to his side. She did not touch him, but she stood close enough that he knew she was there. Samuel's eyes remained on the map. My father planted those trees one by one. He used to tie strips of red cloth to the saplings so he could find them at dusk. Said a tree deserved to be seen even before it was tall. His voice was steady, but his pain was not hidden. Clara remembered the tired orchard in the moonlight, the thin branches, the way Samuel had said he kept the trees because his father planted them. All those years he had blamed himself. All those years, Silas Voss had watched and waited. Judge Merritt folded the map with care. This map and Mr. Pritchard's statement change matters, but we need proof that will stand before a full court, not only before our anger. Rusk, Eli said. If he did it, he knows. And Voss will pay him to vanish, Samuel said. Clara looked at Judge Merritt. Then we have to reach him first. The old judge studied her. You understand this may become difficult. It already is. A faint smile touched the judge's mouth, but it did not last. Then we move quickly. They locked the map in Judge Merritt's leather case, along with Clara's deed. Mr. Pritchard, trembling badly now, swore he would write what he knew. Judge Merritt made him sit at a small desk in the outer office and put the statement down by hand before fear had time to return to its master. While the clerk wrote, Samuel stood by the window, looking across the street at the bank. Clara joined him. Silas Voss had not come out. His polished door remained closed, his brass letters shining in the afternoon sun. Do you hate him? Clara asked. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Yes. The plainness of the answer surprised her. Then he added, but I hate more that he made me hate him. Clara looked at him. Samuel's hands rested on the windowsill. My father believed land teaches a man patience, said anger burns too fast to grow anything. I have spent years trying to live by that. Today I find my hands remembering how easy it would be to drag Voss into the street and make him answer in dust. Clara did not flinch from the honesty. She understood it. Her own hurt had teeth now. But you won't, she said. He looked at her then. No. Why? Because that would make one moment honest and the rest ruined. He turned back to the bank. Truth must do what fists cannot. Clara held those words close. Truth must do what fists cannot. It sounded like something her father might have respected. By late afternoon, they had a plan. Eli would go to the hotel laundry and speak with his sister, who knew where Clyde Rusk had been seen. Judge Merritt would keep the papers hidden at his house for the night, with copies made before sunrise. Samuel would take Clara back to Three Lantern, not because she was weak, but because Voss now knew she was part of the fight and might try to frighten her alone. Clara disliked being sent away from the center of it. Samuel seemed to sense that as they climbed into the wagon. You are not being put aside, he said. I know. You look like you don't. She folded her hands in her lap. I spent yesterday learning what happens when men decide things about my life before telling me. Samuel took that in. Then he handed her the reins. Clara stared at them. He said, then you drive. It was a small thing, a plain thing, yet Clara felt it through her whole chest. She took the reins. The horses started forward at her soft command, and Samuel sat beside her without correcting, without reaching over, without making a show of trust. The wagon rolled out of Willow Creek while faces turned from the boardwalk. Some stared at Clara with open curiosity. Some whispered. One woman near the mercantile leaned close to another and covered her mouth. Clara kept her eyes on the road. Let them look. Yesterday their eyes had stripped her bare. Today they were only eyes. The ride back to Three Lantern Ranch passed under a sky washed clean and wide. The road still held damp places from the rain. Meadowlarks called from the fence line. Clara felt the reins warm in her hands and wondered when she had last held anything that gave her direction instead of taking it away. Near the ranch gate, Samuel pointed toward the west field. Take the left track. To the orchard. Yes. The wagon bumped along the grass until the trees rose ahead. In daylight, the orchard looked worse than it had in darkness. Rows of old peach and apple trees stood thin and weary, leaves curled along some branches, bark split in places. Under several trunks, the soil was stained oddly pale. Clara stopped the wagon. Samuel climbed down and helped her step to the ground, though she hardly needed it. Together they walked between the rows. The orchard was quiet. Too quiet. A good orchard ought to hum in summer. It should carry insects, birds, leaf chatter, the soft fall of fruit. This place felt held back, as if it had been taught not to breathe. Clara knelt near one tree and touched the soil. It crumbled strangely between her fingers. Is this where the leaves curl worst? She asked. Samuel nodded. She moved to another tree. The same pale dust lay beneath it, faint but there. Her mother's garden had once suffered after a neighbor dumped spoiled wash water too near the beans. The leaves had curled in a way that looked much like this. "This did not come from weather," Clara said. Samuel stood above her, his shadow long across the ground. "No," he answered. The word sounded like a door closing. They walked deeper into the orchard until they reached a small shed half hidden behind overgrown brush. Samuel frowned. "I haven't used that shed in years." The door hung crooked. A rusted hinge moaned when Samuel pushed it open. Inside were broken crates, old pruning tools, and dust thick enough to mark every footprint. But in the corner, partly covered by a feed sack, Clara saw the dark curve of a small barrel. Samuel crossed to it. "Don't touch it, Bear," Clara said quickly. He stopped, took a rag from his pocket, rolled the barrel slightly. A faded marking showed on the side. "Cr. Clyde Rusk." Samuel's face hardened. Clara backed away from the shed, her stomach twisting. Proof. Maybe not all the proof they needed, but something real, something that had sat in Samuel's orchard like a hidden sickness while he blamed himself. "We should tell Judge Merritt," Clara said. Samuel covered the barrel again, at first light. A sound came from outside. Both of them turned. At the edge of the orchard stood Mrs. Larkin, holding her shawl tight and staring not at the shed, but past it toward the western fence. "Samuel," she called, voice sharp. He stepped out. "What is it?" She raised one trembling hand. Beyond the last row of trees, smoke was rising from the direction of the leather room. Clara ran before anyone told her to. Her skirt caught on dry grass. Samuel overtook her halfway, shouting for Eli, but Clara did not stop. The barnyard came into view, and with it the small room built onto the side of the barn. Smoke curled from under the door. Not thick yet, but dark. The place that had held her first honest work after ruin. The bench, the tools, the torn saddle, the smell of her father's craft brought back to life. Samuel grabbed a water bucket from the trough and threw open the door. Smoke rolled out. Clara coughed and covered her mouth. Inside, a small fire had caught near the workbench, burning hot along a pile of oiled rags. Samuel threw water. Eli came running with another bucket. Mrs. Larkin shouted orders from the yard with the force of a general. Together they beat the fire down before it took the barn. When the smoke cleared, Clara stepped inside. The workbench was scorched, some straps were ruined. Her apron was blackened along one edge, but the worst of it sat in the middle of the floor. Her father's old leather awl, the one tool she had kept from his shop, lay snapped in two. Clara knelt and picked up the broken handle. For a moment she could not speak. Samuel stood in the doorway, breathing hard, soot streaked across his cheek. "Clara." She looked past him to the wall beside the bench. Something had been pinned there with a nail. A scrap of paper. Samuel pulled it free and read it once. His face went cold. Clara took it from him. The message was written in a rough hand. "Leave what is not yours, or next time the fire reaches the house." The warning note smelled faintly of smoke. Clara held it between two soot-darkened fingers while the barnyard stood silent around her. The words were rough and uneven, but there was no mistaking their meaning. "Leave what is not yours, or next time the fire reaches the house." For a few breaths, all she could hear was the ticking of cooling wood and the nervous shifting of horses in the barn. Smoke drifted past the open door of the leather room, thin now, but bitter. It stung her eyes, though she would not give anyone the comfort of seeing her cry over it. Not yet. Not while whoever had done this might still be close enough to watch. Samuel took one step toward the yard and scanned the fence line. Eli had already gone for his horse. Mrs. Larkin stood near the porch with a bucket in one hand and fury written in every line of her old face. "Cowards," she said, "always sneaking around another person's home because they haven't the courage to knock." Clara looked back into the leather room. That morning it had been dusty but alive with promise. Now the bench was black along one corner. Several strips of good leather had curled and shriveled from the heat. The saddle Samuel had trusted her to mend lay safe only because it had fallen from the bench when the fire started. Smoke stains reached up the wall like dirty fingers. And on the floor in her palm rested the broken handle of her father's awl. That small thing hurt worse than the fire. Her father had used it for years. His thumb had worn the wood smooth on one side. Clara had carried it after his death because it was the last tool the creditors had missed. She had told herself that as long as she had that awl, some part of his shop still lived. Now it was split clean through. Samuel came beside her, his voice low. "I am sorry." Clara closed her fingers around the broken tool. "You did not break it." "No, but I brought this danger to your door." She looked at him then. Soot marked his cheek. His shirt sleeve was burned at the cuff. His hands were red from heat and water, and there was pain in his face that had nothing to do with the fire. He looked toward the orchard, toward the house, toward everything his father had left him, a man counting what might be taken next. Clara knew that look. It was the look of someone who had been trying to hold a life together, while other people came at it with knives. "This is not only your door anymore," she said. The word surprised them both. Samuel's eyes met hers. Clara looked away first, not from shame, but because the feeling behind those words was too large to hold in the open. Eli rode back before sunset, having followed faint tracks from the far fence to the dry creek bed. He had found where a horse had waited among the cottonwoods, but the rain-soft ground turned rocky beyond that, and the trail was lost. Still, he had brought back one thing, a torn strip of black cloth caught on barbed wire. "Could be anyone's," Eli said, though nobody believed it. Samuel took it. "Voss wears black." "Half the county owns a black coat," Mrs. Larkin said, "but only one man wears his like the Lord-made cloth just to flatter him." Clara would have laughed on another day. Instead, she stood in the doorway of the leather room and looked at the damage. "The note says leave what is not mine." Samuel turned. "The land is yours." "So is the truth," she said. That night, Three Lantern Ranch did not sleep easily. Eli kept watch from the barn loft. Samuel moved the horses closer to the house. Mrs. Larkin placed a kettle on the stove and kept coffee ready as if caffeine alone could defend the place. Clara sat at the kitchen table with her father's broken awl before her and the smoke note beside it. No one said the thing they all knew. Silas Voss was no longer only using papers. He had grown afraid enough to use fire. Judge Merritt arrived after dark in a covered buggy, his old mule splashed with mud and his coat damp from the evening mist. He brought a leather case under his arm and a face full of grave news. "Clyde Rusk is gone," he said as soon as he stepped inside. Samuel closed the door behind him. "Gone where?" "No one knows. Eli's sister heard he left the hotel before noon with 2 bags and a bottle of whiskey, boasting he had worked west of the ridge. I sent a boy to his shack. Empty." Eli cursed under his breath, then apologized to Clara and Mrs. Larkin. Judge Merritt laid his case on the table. But Pritchard finished his written statement, and I made copies of the map. Your deed is safe for now. For now, Samuel repeated. The judge nodded toward the smoke note. Voss is pressing because the rail company will send surveyors next week. Once the route is public, he cannot buy quiet. He needs claims settled before then. Clara looked at the broken awl. Then we have a week. Less, Judge Merritt said. If he can frighten you into leaving, he may file a debt claim against your father's estate and tie the land in court for years. If he can force Samuel to sell the orchard before the poison is proved, he wins there too. Samuel's jaw tightened. I won't sell. I know, said the judge, but men can be made tired. That is often cheaper than making them wrong. Mrs. Larkin poured coffee with a hard clatter of cups. So what do we do besides sit around waiting for another match? Judge Merritt looked at Clara. We make it public. The kitchen went quiet. Clara lifted her eyes. The judge continued. Tomorrow is Saturday, market day. Half the county will be in Willow Creek. If the evidence stays hidden, Voss can chip away at it. If the whole town hears the truth, he must answer before witnesses. Samuel frowned. That puts Clara in the center of town again. Clara felt the old fear stir. The church came back to her in flashes, The aisle, the note, the stairs, the whispers, her hand shaking over prairie roses. Again, the town would watch her. Again, her name would be spoken by mouths that did not love her. But this time, the shame was not hers to carry. She picked up the smoke note and placed it beside the map copy Judge Merritt had drawn from his case. "Then let them watch," she said. Samuel looked at her with quiet concern. "You do not have to prove yourself to them." "No," Clara said, "but Voss needs shadows. Wayne needed silence. I have given both men enough of mine." Mrs. Larkin's stern face softened just a little. "Your father would be proud to hear that." Clara's throat tightened, but she only nodded. The next morning, Willow Creek was crowded with wagons, horses, crates of eggs, baskets of beans, and children running where they were told not to. The market stretched along the main street beneath canvas shades. Men argued over flour prices. Women examined cloth. A fiddler played near the blacksmith shop, and the smell of fried corn cakes drifted through the warm air. When Clara stepped down from Samuel's wagon, the town noticed. Of course it did. A hush moved in pieces, first near the mercantile, then along the stalls, then across the street to the church steps. Clara wore her plain blue dress, carefully washed but still faintly marked at the hem from the road. Her hair was pinned simply beneath a straw bonnet. In one hand she carried her father's broken awl wrapped in a clean cloth. In the other she carried nothing at all. Samuel stood to her left. Eli was a few paces behind. Judge Merritt walked with his cane and his leather case. Mrs. Larkin came too, though her knees troubled her because, as she said, "I am not missing the day a banker sweats in public." They did not go to the bank. Judge Merritt led them to the church steps. That choice struck Clara deep. The same place where she had left as a humiliated bride would now hold her voice. People gathered quickly. Curiosity had always been Willow Creek's fastest horse. Reverend Pike came out, startled, wiping his hands on a handkerchief. "Judge Merritt." "Reverend," the old judge said, "we need a few minutes of public attention." "You seem to have it." The judge turned to the crowd. "Good people of Willow Creek, I ask you to listen before you judge, which will be a new exercise for some of you." A nervous laugh moved through the street. Clara saw Mrs. Calder near the front, lips pressed tight. Mr. Teague stood by the hitching rail. Ruth, her friend from the wedding, pushed through the crowd with worried eyes and stopped when she saw Clara standing tall. Then Wayne Bell appeared near the bank corner. His face changed when he saw the judge's case. A moment later, Silas Voss stepped from the bank. He did not hurry. Men like Voss believed slow movement made them look innocent. He crossed the street with his black coat buttoned and his smile polished. "What is this performance?" he asked. Judge Merritt opened his case. "A correction." The judge spoke first. He did not shout. He did not accuse without showing why. He told them of Clara's father's hidden letter, the deed to Eleanor Harper Whitcomb's land, the missing page in the county register, the vault key taken by Voss, and the map marked in Voss's own hand. When he held up the map copy, murmurs broke through the crowd. Dry Mercy Spring. Three Lantern Orchard. The rail lined. Acquire before filing. Voss lifted one hand, calm as a preacher. Speculation, nothing more. Landmen often prepare possibilities. Judge Merritt's eyes narrowed. Do they also cut pages from public record books? I did no such thing. Do they remove vault keys? For safekeeping. Do they pay men like Clyde Rusk? Voss's face stilled. That small pause did what shouting could not. The crowd felt it. Samuel stepped forward then. He did not tell the town about his anger. He told them about the orchard, his father planting it, the years of decline, the strange marks in the soil, the barrel found in the unused shed with Clyde Rusk's initials on it. He spoke simply with no flourish, and the plainness made every word land harder. Some faces in the crowd changed. Men who had sold land cheap looked at one another. A widow near the feed stall began to cry quietly. A farmer named Abel Cross called out that Voss had pressed him too after the West Route rumors began. Then another man spoke. Then another. Voss's smile was gone now. Wayne tried to slip away. Ruth saw him. "Wayne Bell," she called, her voice ringing clear enough to turn heads. "You were proud enough to leave Clara with a note. Be proud enough to stand while the truth is read." Wayne stopped, trapped by the eyes of the same town that had once watched Clara. A strange thing happened then. The shame moved. It lifted from Clara's shoulders and crossed the street to the men who had made use of it. Clara stepped onto the church steps. The crowd quieted. Her heart beat hard, but she did not let fear choose her words. 2 days ago, she said, I stood in this church wearing a wedding dress. Many of you saw me left there. Some pitied me. Some blamed me. Some enjoyed the story before you knew the truth. Several faces lowered. I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to a woman, to be left with no husband, no home, and no name safe from talk. Clara looked toward Wayne. But I have learned worse things than being left. Worse is being lied to by people who count on your silence. Worse is being treated like property because someone thinks you are too alone to fight. Wayne's face turned red. Clara lifted the broken awl from its cloth. This belonged to my father. Last night someone set fire to the room where I work and broke what little I had left of his tools. They left a warning telling me to leave what is not mine. She looked across the crowd, then at Silas Voss. My mother's land is mine, my father's memory is mine, my work is mine, my voice is mine, and I will not leave any of it because a coward writes threats in smoke. The crowd was silent. Then Mrs. Larkin, standing at the bottom step, said loudly, "Amen to that." A few people laughed, but it was a warm sound. Silas Voss clapped slowly once, twice, with a smile that had returned thinner than before. "A moving speech," he said, "but emotion does not prove ownership, and neither does a broken tool. Miss Whitcomb is wounded. We all understand that. Mr. Reed is bitter over poor crops. Judge Merritt is retired and fond of old battles. If there is law here, let law decide it, not market gossip." He turned as if to leave. Then a voice called from the far edge of the crowd. "Law can start with me." Every head turned. A man stood beside the blacksmith shop, hat low, shirt torn at the shoulder, face bruised from hard riding or harder living. His eyes were bloodshot, and one hand gripped the hitching post as if the street moved under him. Eli whispered, "Clyde Rusk." Voss went white. Rusk stumbled forward. "I ain't running no more, Voss." The banker's voice snapped, "You are drunk." "Some," Rusk said, "but sober enough to know fire is one thing and burning folks in their beds is another." The crowd backed away as he came closer. Rusk pointed a shaking finger at the bank. "He paid me to sour the soil under Reed's trees, paid me to scare folks off land west of town, paid me to watch Whitcomb's girl after her pa died. Bell knew some, not all, enough to keep smiling and courting while Voss waited for her to sign." Wayne shouted, "Liar." Rusk laughed bitterly. "You want me to tell them about the paper you brought to the bank? Marriage settlement, you called it. Had her mother's land folded into it pretty as a gift box." The crowd turned on Wayne. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Clara felt Samuel near her, not touching her but there. Rusk reached inside his coat. Voss took a step back. But Rusk only pulled out a folded packet of receipts, stained and creased. "I kept these," he said. "Figured one day a rich man might decide a poor man knew too much." Judge Merritt took the packet. He opened it slowly. The top receipt bore Silas Voss's signature. For several seconds, no one moved. Then the church bell above them gave one low creak in the wind, as if the building itself had finally heard enough. The street outside the church did not erupt all at once. It changed slowly, like a storm gathering its mind. First came the silence, heavy and stunned. Then whispers moved from one end of the market to the other. Farmers leaned closer to one another. Women who had once lowered their voices around Clara now stared openly at Silas Voss. Men who had borrowed from his bank shifted their weight as if the ground beneath them had turned uncertain. Judge Merritt held Clyde Rusk's receipts in one hand and the map copy in the other. His face had gone grave. "Mr. Voss," he said, "I believe you will remain in town." Voss drew himself up. "You have no authority to hold me." "No," the judge replied, "but Sheriff Callahan does." At that name, the crowd parted. Sheriff Amos Callahan had been standing near the blacksmith shop, half hidden behind two freight wagons, listening with his thumbs hooked in his belt. He was not a quick man. He did not like crowds, and he liked public trouble even less. But his eyes were clear as he walked forward. "Silas," the sheriff said, "I think you'd best come with me until this gets sorted proper." Voss laughed once, sharp and empty. On the word of Clyde Rusk, a drunk, a hired drifter. Rusk's face twisted. "You liked me well enough when I was pouring poison under another man's trees." A hard murmur rolled through the crowd. Samuel stood very still beside Clara. She could feel the anger in him, but he kept it bridled. His eyes stayed on Voss, not wild, not cruel, only deeply wounded. Voss turned toward the people, as if they were a jury he could still charm. "You know me," he said. "I have loaned money to half the families here. I have kept businesses alive. I have paid for church repairs and school slates. You will believe this circus over the man who built this town's credit." An older farmer stepped forward. Clara recognized him as Abel Cross, the man who had spoken earlier. "You held my note over me till I sold you 40 acres west of the ridge for near nothing," Abel said. "Told me the land would never feed my sons. 2 months later your man was marking survey stakes on it." Another voice rose, "Same with my brother's place." Then another, "You pressed my widow aunt after the funeral." The crowd was not shouting. That made it worse. These were not wild accusations thrown in heat. They were old hurts coming into daylight one by one, each with a face and a name. Wayne Bell stood pale near the bank corner. He looked smaller now, as if the fine coat could not hold him upright. Clara watched him glance toward the alley, measuring distance. Samuel saw it too. "Don't," Samuel said. Wayne froze. Clara stepped down from the church steps. The crowd made room for her, and that alone nearly stopped her breath. 2 days ago, they had parted to let her walk away in shame. Now they parted as if her steps mattered. She stopped in front of Wayne. He would not look at her. "Is it true?" she asked. His jaw worked. "Clara, you don't understand how these things are done." That answer is yes, wearing a coward's hat. A few people murmured, but Clara kept her eyes on him. Wayne lowered his voice. "Voss said the land was wasted on you. He said once we were married, I could sign with you and we'd both be set. I was going to take care of you." Clara felt no surprise now, only a sadness so clean it almost felt like peace. "No," she said. "You were going to sell what my mother left me and call it care." Wayne's face tightened. "I could have given you a good life. You could not even give me the truth." He looked down at the dust. Behind her, Sheriff Callahan took the receipts from Judge Merritt and folded them into his coat. "Silas Voss, I'm asking you peaceful." Voss's eyes flashed. "And if I refuse?" The sheriff rested one hand near his belt, not drawing, not threatening, only ready. "Then you'll shame yourself worse than you already have." For the first time, Clara saw fear break through Voss's polished face. Not regret. Fear. There was a difference, and she knew it now. Voss looked at the bank, at the crowd, at the sheriff, then finally at Clara. His gaze was cold with blame, as if all of this had happened because she had refused to stay broken. "You think this makes you safe?" he said. Samuel stepped forward. "Enough." Clara lifted a hand slightly, and Samuel stopped. She faced Voss herself. "No," she said, "I think it makes you seen." The words settled over the street. Voss had no answer to that. Sheriff Callahan took him by the arm. No one cheered. No one clapped. It would have made the moment too small. They simply watched as the banker who had held so many lives in quiet fear was led toward the jail at the end of the street. Wayne tried to follow at a distance, but Judge Merritt turned his stern eyes on him. "Mr. Bell," he said, "you will also remain available to the court." Wayne swallowed. "I didn't set fires, I didn't poison trees." "No," Clara said quietly. "You only stood close enough to profit and far enough to pretend your hands were clean." That struck him harder than anger would have. Ruth came to Clara's side then, tears in her eyes. "Clara, I am sorry. I should have come after you that day. I should have said more." Clara looked at her old friend, and the hurt between them softened. "You cried for me when others whispered. I remember." Ruth took her hand. "What will you do now?" Clara looked toward Samuel. He stood near the church steps, soot still faint beneath one sleeve cuff from the fire, his expression steady and unreadable. Three Lantern Ranch waited beyond town with its tired orchard, scorched leather room, and a future still full of work. Dry Mercy Spring waited too, the 12 acres her mother had somehow kept safe across time. "I don't know all of it," Clara said, "but I am done letting other people decide before I'm told." By late afternoon, statements were taken at the jail. Clyde Rusk, shaking badly now that whiskey and fear were wearing off, gave names, dates, and places. Mr. Pritchard confessed Voss had ordered him to delay certain records and look away from others. Wayne admitted enough to stain himself forever, though not enough to sound brave. Judge Merritt sent telegrams to the county seat and the rail office. Sheriff Callahan locked the evidence in his safe. The town, which had once fed on Clara's humiliation, now fed on the truth with a different hunger. But Clara had no taste for hearing it repeated. As evening came, she and Samuel rode back to Three Lantern Ranch in the wagon. Mrs. Larkin and Eli followed behind with supplies from market that no one remembered buying until they were already loaded. The sky was soft and pink above the hills. The wind smelled of damp earth and horse sweat. For a long while, Clara and Samuel said nothing. Then Samuel spoke. "You stood well today." Clara watched the road ahead. "I was afraid again." "I know." That made her turn. He looked at her with quiet warmth. Bravery that never feels fear is just ignorance in a clean shirt. A tired laugh escaped her. "Mrs. Larkin teach you that?" No, she would have said it louder. This time Clara truly laughed, and Samuel smiled. Not almost, not hidden, a real smile, small but full. The sight touched something in her heart she was not ready to name. When they reached the ranch, the orchard lay in evening shadow. Clara walked to the first row before going inside. Samuel came with her. The trees stood damaged, yes, but still rooted, still reaching. She knelt near one of the poisoned trunks and pressed her palm to the soil. "We can save some," she said. "Not all, but some." Samuel stood beside her. "You sound sure." "I am not sure, I am willing." He looked down at her, and something passed between them, gentle and deep as the last light. Before he could answer, Eli called from the barn. "Samuel, Clara, you need to see this." They hurried toward the leather room. Eli stood by the scorched workbench, holding a small tin box blackened by smoke. It must have fallen from behind a loose wall board when the fire damaged the wood. Inside were old letters, tied with a faded red ribbon. Samuel went still when he saw the handwriting. Clara looked at him. "What is it?" He lifted the top letter with a trembling hand. "My mother S," he said. The envelope was addressed not to his father, but to Clara's mother. And across the front, in faded ink, were the words, "About the spring land and the promise we made." Samuel held his mother's letter like it was a living thing. The lantern on the scorched workbench threw soft light across the burned wall, the blackened tin box, and the faded red ribbon that had kept those papers hidden for years. Outside, the orchard rustled in the evening wind. Inside, no one moved. Clara stood beside him, afraid to breathe too loudly. Samuel's mother had been gone nearly 8 years. Clara knew that from town talk, but she had never heard Samuel speak of her except in small, careful ways. A woman who sang while she canned peaches. A woman who could make a sick calf stand because she refused to believe it was finished. A woman who had loved the orchard like it was another child. Now her handwriting sat between them, addressed to Clara's mother. Samuel opened the letter. His eyes moved slowly over the page. With each line his face changed, first confusion, then grief, then something softer, almost wonder. "What does it say?" Clara asked. Samuel swallowed. "Our mothers knew each other." Clara stepped closer. He read aloud, voice low. "Eleanor, if the fever takes me before we finish what we planned, remember the promise. Your spring land and our orchard were never meant to stand apart. Water from Dry Mercy can be brought by ditch if the West Ridge is cut right. My Daniel believes it can save both places in dry years. Your girl and my boy may never care for land the way we do, but if hard times come, let the papers show what we agreed. No banker should ever split what two families meant to keep whole. Samuel stopped reading. The room was silent. Clara felt the words settle slowly. Her mother's 12 acres were not just land. They were part of a plan. Dry Mercy Spring had water. Three Lantern had orchard soil. Their families had once meant to join them, not by force, not by marriage, not by scheme, but by trust. Samuel lifted another paper from the box. It was a rough drawing, old and brittle, showing the spring, the ridge, and a narrow irrigation ditch running toward the orchard. Clara touched the edge of it with trembling fingers. Your orchard wasn't only poisoned, she whispered. It was thirsty. Samuel looked toward the dark window. All these years, the answer was sitting in a wall. No, Clara said softly. It was waiting for both pieces to find each other. The next weeks changed Willow Creek. Silas Voss was taken to the county seat under guard. His bank was searched, his private ledgers seized, and men who had once bowed to him began telling the truth with their hats in their hands. Wayne Bell left town before the trial, but he did not escape disgrace. His name followed him farther than any horse could carry him. Not because Clara chased him with revenge, but because truth, once spoken plainly, had a longer reach than gossip. The missing page from the county book was never found, but it no longer mattered. Judge Merritt proved Clara's deed through the vault copy, her father's letter, her mother's name, and the older agreement hidden in Samuel's wall. Dry Mercy Spring belonged to Clara Whitcomb. Three Lantern Orchard remained Samuel Reed's, and the promise between their mothers stood as clear as sunrise. But winning the land was only the beginning. The work came next. Samuel, Clara, Eli, Mrs. Larkin, and half a dozen neighbors who were ashamed enough to become useful began cutting the old ditch from Dry Mercy Spring to the lower orchard. Men swung picks. Women brought food. Children carried tin cups of water and got more mud on themselves than on the ground. Even Reverend Pike came with his sleeves rolled and his spectacles sliding down his nose. Clara worked beside them, her hands blistered, her dress hem stained, her father's broken awl tucked in her pocket like a relic. One afternoon, Samuel found her kneeling by the spring, washing mud from her wrists. Sunlight touched the water, making it shine between the cottonwoods. I had the awl mended, he said. He held it out. The handle bore a brass band where it had split. It would never look the same, but it was whole enough to work. Clara took it, eyes burning. Who fixed it? Eli knew a smith in Abilene. She ran her thumb over the brass seam. It shows the break. Samuel nodded. Some mended things should. That was when Clara cried. Not hard, not broken. Just enough to let the last of the fire and church and fear leave her in quiet drops. Samuel did not crowd her. He sat on a stone nearby and waited, steady as ever. By late summer, water reached the first row of trees. No one cheered at first. They simply watched the narrow stream slide through the ditch, clear and stubborn, touching roots that had known more poison than mercy. Samuel removed his hat. Clara stood beside him with mud on her boots and sunlight in her hair. The orchard did not heal in a day. Real things seldom do. Some trees died and had to be cut down. Samuel grieved each one. Clara helped plant new saplings where the old roots could not be saved. She opened the leather room again, rebuilt the bench, and took orders from ranchers who now spoke to her with respect. She did not need their respect to know her worth, but she accepted it as a debt long overdue. In spring, the surviving trees bloomed. White and pink blossoms spread across Three Lantern Orchard like a quiet miracle. Bees came wild from the ridge, then more from hives Clara set near the fence, learning their ways as carefully as she had learned leather. The air hummed from morning until dusk. Samuel found Clara beneath the first blooming peach tree. She was holding one of her mother's letters, the one that spoke of hope in dry years. My mother wanted this, Clara said. So did mine, Samuel answered. Clara looked at the orchard. They trusted a future they would not live to see. Samuel stood beside her. Maybe that is what love does when it is honest. The bees moved through the branches. A lantern swung softly on the porch of the distant house. Samuel reached into his coat and brought out no ring, only a small strip of leather Clara had stitched months before, shaped now into a simple band around a plain silver circle. "I will not ask because you need a home," he said. "You have land, you have work, you have a name that stands on its own. I will not ask because your mother's spring feeds my orchard or because our families once made a promise. I am asking because every road I imagine walking from here feels empty unless you are walking it by choice beside me." Clara looked at him through tears. He smiled gently. "Clara Whitcomb, would you marry me?" She thought of the church aisle, the note, the stone by the road. She thought of a quiet man asking if she had anywhere to go, then giving her room enough to choose. She thought of broken tools mended with brass, poisoned trees blooming again, and water finding roots after years of thirst. "Yes," she said, "not because I have nowhere to go, because I know exactly where I want to stay." They married beneath the orchard in June, with no grand show and no cruel whispers. Mrs. Larkin cried and denied it. Eli stood beside Samuel and limped proudly through every dance. Ruth placed prairie roses in Clara's hands, fresh and white, not wilted from waiting. Years later, folks still spoke of Three Lantern Ranch and Dry Mercy Spring as the place where poison trees bloomed sweeter than any in the county. Clara trained girls with no homes and boys with no fathers in leatherwork, gardening, and the patient care of hives. She told them a person's worth could be hidden, stolen from, lied about, or mocked, but never truly erased. And when her children asked about the old wedding dress folded in the cedar chest, Clara told them the truth. "It was the dress I wore on the day I thought I lost everything," she said. "But really, it was the day I stopped belonging to fear." If this story warmed your heart, leave a kind word for Clara and Samuel, and subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where truth, love, and healing meet on the frontier. At sunset, Clara often stood by the first peach tree that bloomed again. Samuel would come up beside her, quiet as ever, and the two of them would listen to the bees moving through the branches while the three lanterns on the porch glowed behind them. The final light would touch the spring ditch, the orchard, the mended all in Clara's workroom, and the road where she had once arrived with nowhere left to go. Only now, that road did not look like an ending. It looked like the way home,